join us. But hello, everyone, and welcome to this breakout session for Hacking HR's Global Online Conference. My name is Meighan Newhouse, and I'm serving as the moderator for today's panel. It is my great pleasure to be speaking with our industry experts and disruptors, and I can't wait for them to introduce themselves in a minute. I'm just going to go ahead and introduce myself so you know who I am. I'm Meighan Newhouse. I am the Chief People Officer for Inspirant Group. Inspirant is a boutique consulting firm that is working on disrupting the consulting industry, and we focus on process, technology, and people transformation. So this conversation today is very near and dear to my heart, and I'm so glad to be a part of it. And I'm going to ask Esther now to go ahead and introduce herself, and we're going to so you know who we are before we jump into the content.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Meighan, and thanks everyone. And I'm very excited to be with all of you today. I'm Ester Martinez. I'm the CEO and founder of People Matters, which is Asia's largest HR community. And I'm based half of my time in Singapore, half of my time in Delhi. I'm in Delhi today, and it's 1:30 a.m. for me. So I hope nobody is going to come down and you'll see my kids moving around. So I'm just giving a disclosure. And what I'm looking forward to bringing to the participants today is a little bit of a reflection of what it takes to bring clarity of what transformation really is about and what is the measurable outcomes of transformation. And hopefully, if we're able to come through some of those answers, we'll be able to build a very strong business case. So that's what I'm looking forward to the session today. And I'm going to request Sesil now to go and introduce herself.
Sure, absolutely. Hello, everyone. Sesil here. I'm an industrial and organizational psychologist. I've spent all of my career, about 23 years now, in the space of human resources management and organizational development. I think I mentioned this, but I'm tying in from Zurich, so it's evening my time, but I'm hoping to share with the audience how we think of change and transformation being different and the role of culture in driving and leading effective transformations. Who goes next? How about Mark? Do you want to go next?
Sounds great. Thanks, Cecile. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. I'm Mark Stelzner. I'm the founder and managing principal of an advisory firm called IA. Had the great pleasure of founding the firm 14 years ago. 25 years of broad-scale HR transformation experience. We service clients ranging from 3,000 to 500,000 employees globally, helping them with HR organizational design and strategy, helping them build the business case for substantiation of change, rationalization of the provider ecosystem, and then continuous improvement through change management and process improvement. But very excited. This is a topic that is absolutely near and dear to my heart. And just a pleasure to be with everyone today. And I am joining from Nashville, Tennessee. We unfortunately had a very devastating tornado in our region last night, lost a few dozen citizens and many, many dozens of homes. So thank you for your kind words and prayers. They're much appreciated for our community today.
And thank you for joining us today after what must have been a very busy night for you. And thank you for your intros. We also have Tomas who will be joining us as well. Unfortunately, a little bit of technical difficulties, but we'll keep moving. And hopefully Jose will be able to join us shortly and introduce himself. I just out, it looks like most of you have been able to. Oh, Jose, there he is.
Oh no, I had to join in through the through my my unfortunately the I don't. Can you hear me here?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we can hear you.
I had to do it through the iPad, so I apologize, but I'll introduce myself really quick. I don't know how I did that in less than 30 seconds, but I appreciate you all being very kind to allow me to come back into the session and figure this out. So my name is Jose Tomas, and I am the principal and managing partner of an organization called BrandSparc. We are an internal communications and employment branding firm based here in sunny South Florida. Prior to that, I was the head of human resources for several large organizations, including Burger King, Anthem Health, which is the second largest health benefits provider in the U.S., as well as General Motors. And I certainly hope that by the time this session is done, that each of you that's participated is going to take a little bit of a nugget, a little bit of information as to how you'll be able to lead the HR transformation in your organizations, creating that strategic plan and creating that communications plan that you'll be able to cascade. In the meantime, I'm going to go look for my headphones here and see if I can do a better job.
Thank So glad that you're able to get back on, and thank you all for the introduction. So it looks like we've got 50 participants in our session right now, and thank you all for being here. The chat is live. I appreciate those of you who have shared with us where in the world you are dialing in from. And again, we're just so grateful that you're here being a part of this conversation with us. And as you can tell, it's going to be a really great one. So we're so glad that Jose jumped back on because he is going to kick off the conversation. Hello, Vanessa in Atlanta and Misty in Baltimore. Jose's going to start the conversation for us. And I just want to ask you, let's think about for a minute how you even get started with this idea of transforming HR, right? Like I feel when you talk about transformation, people tend to think it's an IT thing. So how do we translate that? What does that mean for HR when we talk about transformation?
Well, I think first of all, we have to acknowledge the fact that transformation is a pretty broad term, and I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about that. Transformation is sometimes, to the ears of many folks on this webinar, is an overused term, but in reality, it's a little bit different in every organization. Every organization sees transformation differently, and I'm happy to say that we'll cover a little bit of that. But the first thing you should consider is the business case. Are you looking at an organization that maybe is shrinking, that's exiting markets, or an organization that's growing, that's entering new markets? That certainly has a significant impact in how you're going to manage your messaging, your communication, your strategic plan around your HR transformation. One of the things that we always talk about is the culture adept. Are you, or is your function or is your organization open for change? Is the culture one that wants to transform? And in many instances, the HR professionals and the HR team wants to transform. The organization wants HR to transform, but maybe they don't have the appetite for it. Maybe they're not ready for it. Maybe they're not sold on the business plan. And maybe, as we saw now with coronavirus, maybe the timing as far as the planning is concerned may change. Understanding these business conditions is critical for the HR person as they're putting forth the messaging, the communication that's necessary for this plan. And I'll say that after that, the hardest part comes in, because now you have to convince your internal stakeholders. In many instances, these stakeholders are your own HR folks that you're going to go through an HR transformation. In many instances, it's your CFO, your CEO, other C-suite members, broader members of the organization. They have to also be convinced. And every single HR transformation that many of us have led first starts with the ability to convince the organization. And in doing so, you're going to have to create a very thorough plan of action, a very thorough and concise plan that helps not only the internal HR team, but also outside stakeholders. And again, your peers in the organization understand that it is an imperative. And what we always suggest is that you start with an education campaign, that you start with a communications campaign that sometimes may take a little bit of time to get the organization ready and adept for that HR transformation. And we'll cover a little bit more with other speakers as far as the speed and how far and how deep you want to go through. But your campaign has to address what that change is going to look like. The life cycle of your organization is critical. Whether or not you're prepared from a cultural standpoint, whether or not you're prepared from a business standpoint, are all elements that you need to now put forth in front of your peers, put forth in front of your HR team to help them to better understand whether or not the organization is ready, and then to what scale is it ready. You have to understand what the cultural biases are. You need to see whether or not you are leading an effort that may get pushback. If you're new in the organization and they brought you in for a transformation, be cautious in many instances, because the organization may not be ready for you to lead and launch a transformation. In some instances, your best friends are those across and outside of the HR function that are going to give you the nuggets of information, the analytics that are necessary in order to put that business case forth. But if I'm going to leave you with anything, is that it is an education campaign. It is a communications campaign. You can't just start out by saying HR is going to go out and roll out a new system, whether it's launch a new human capital management system, and then all of a sudden change management is just going to organically occur. It is a process that takes time. It is a process that requires, in many instances, communication like this, webinars. It requires, in some instances, websites to be enhanced, your intranet site. Anything that you can do to completely immerse the organization and buying in to the idea that you want to create change within HR, that's how it starts. And it's not going to be easily bought in. Now, the size and scope of your HR transformation will vary depending on the life cycle. Again, if you're in a mature organization and change is resistant or your organization is resistant to change because of that maturity, it certainly is very different than one that's going through high speeds of innovation. They might find that an HR transformation is required, and an HR transformation is part of what will keep the organization viable and healthy. So if I can summarize, prepare your plan, communicate your plan, communicate your plan, communicate your plan, and get the organization ready for that. Thank you, Meighan.
Awesome, Jose. Absolutely. And I think that couple key points that I heard from you there, you know, how mature the organization is if they're ready for that change. And we heard that, you know, transformation, as I mentioned, is not just an IT thing. It's actually very much a people thing. And so, Sesil, I'd like to ask you, tell us about that human side of what transformation actually looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. And I fully agree with Jose. I think having the business case front and center is quite helpful. The good news is that we all live in that business case today. The fact is, today's organizations were never really designed to sort of evolve proactively and sustainably. They were more so built for what I call just-in-time discipline and efficiency, and that was almost always enforced through hierarchy and routinization up until now. So when we look at the broader landscape of business and what's happening, there's become a mismatch, if you will, with the pace of change we see in the external environment and the speed at which our organization can respond. I think none of us would argue that change has sort of become an inevitable in the current environment. The question I think we need to ask is whether we try to direct the forces of change, or we take it as a given and try to shift our status quo. And for me, this is a cultural question. And also in our work, we see this is where a lot of organizations sort of get stuck, because we are used to thinking of change as a one-time event, right? So in a lot of the organizations, when we go in, we see that change is still seen as an episodic thing that's going to disrupt the status quo inside the organization. And therefore, it's still being initiated. And a lot of the times, they're trying to manage the change from top down. But we have to recognize this is sort of an outside-in view, and it's in a way contrary to what we need in this current environment. What we believe is needed is not to sort of design yet another change program, if you will, but to create a platform that's going to enable and drive inside-out transcendence, both at an individual but also at a collective level. And this is where, for me, the change literature sort of coincides with culture. Unfortunately, our view on culture is just as archaic as the way we view change. So there are a couple of challenges I would like to put out there for the audience. One is, when we think about culture today, a lot of the times it's defined as sort of behaviors, values, artifacts inside of an organization. Now, this is true, but it's only partly true, because it's important for us to delineate the formal practices are sort of an outcome of the culture, but it's not the culture itself. A culture, whether it's for a family, for a school, or for a corporate organization, is really about the quality of texture. So it's the climate that takes place when we are self-organizing, and there are patterns of habits in there. And there's quite a bit of sense making. So in ways we really have to sort of understand that it surrounds us, right? The second challenge I'll put out there is that we often think of culture as a collective thing. And again, this is only partially true because culture by definition is innate. So it starts at an individual level for sure, but from there it gets transmitted onto others and then so there's a systemic event that's happening. And the third challenge I'll put out there is that culture is a system, but it's a human system. So in ways that there are interdependence and interrelatedness. So our habits and the ways we respond is really mimicking one another. I often say an individual is never a free agent inside of a culture. So this is also why sometimes we see people that we may qualify as good go into what we may qualify as toxic behaviors, and then they start showing negative patterns of behavior because they're in fact impacted inside the environment. So I would like to share with the group a model that we started using with organizations that work really well. We call it human-centered organizations. And it's sort of an inside-out view. So it's not an outside and it's an inside-out view. And there are these three large buckets that we try to work with. The first one is what we call being. So it starts at an individual level. And we try to activate new mindsets for individuals that can help them shift individual behavior. So we're working with people's intentions, their beliefs, their emotions, etc. The second big bucket is what we call relating. This is about how people work with one another, how they connect to one another, how they collaborate with one another. So we take teams and sort of ground them around specific values, and we show them what patterns of behaviors could potentially look like. So we look at their roles, we look at their routines in terms of how they're sharing information or making decisions. We look at the deliverables that they're able to either achieve or drive or not. The third large bucket is what we call doing. So here we look for ways to sort of improve the systemic ways of working. This may be around looking at the collective mission, making sure they have a strategy that is executable. We may also think about stories that are going to sort of support the culture. Only after those three large buckets, we think about a structural transformation. So if there needs to be a process consideration or we change the makeup of the structure, a lot of that comes after. So just to sort of summarize, change is quite different than transformation. If we were to sort of, put some bullet points, change is implementing a finite amount of initiatives, where transformation is really about sort of generic alteration of your body. Change focuses on problem solving, where transformation is really looking to sort of drive reality shift. So change centers around your process owners. Transformation actually involves stakeholders. And because of that, change uses external influences, external motivators to sort of drive the behaviors. And transformation actually activates intrinsic motivation to drive the behavior. So in some ways, change is trying to fix something, maybe the past, but transformation is trying to sort of rebuild, envision the future. So with that, I think what I want to say is if we want to drive effective transformations, we definitely want to consider culture, and we need to sort of activate a sense of ownership, both at an individual level, but also at a team and collective level. So there are multiple layers that we have to consider inside of an organization. That was a lot. I hope that's helpful.
Sesil, that was great. I think you gave us some real tangible items to think about and consider when we're thinking about what the transformations look like. Martin asked if you have a link to the human-centered organization. So maybe we get that posted in the chat.
Absolutely. We can post the summary in the chat for sure.
Wonderful. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think it feels overwhelming, I think, if you're just getting started here, right? So there's a lot to think about. What Jose was sharing with us about, is the organization ready for us? Are they ready for this change? Change is hard, change is scary. Sesil, that methodology and the framework that you just shared sounds incredible, like a great way to approach a change. But my gosh, I've never done anything I even get started in doing something like that? So Mark, can you help us think through, like, what are the actual mechanics when we're going to get started on going through this transformation?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the question. And I'll build on what Jose and Sesil have already shared. So foundationally, what we do, and I'll put this out there as a challenge because I love a challenge. Every business case we've ever written has been approved. Every single one in 25 years of my career, 14 years of running IA. And I want to put a very fine point on what you just heard from my fellow panelists, which is starting by knowing yourself. Know thyself, know thy culture, leadership, structure, headwinds, tailwinds, expansion, strategic plan. Part of getting ready and getting organized is treating yourself like a private investigator internally in your organization. You have to be forensic. You have to look under every rock. You have to understand foundationally how work is actually done today, not your notion of what you think work is or who you think is effectuating work, but going to a detailed level and nth degree of double clicking and double clicking again and double clicking one more time to map out every single step of every single process to understand actors, technology, outcomes, culture, norms, change catalysts. Is there a new leader? Are there a series of new leaders? Are we entering new markets or new verticals? Are we divesting, acquiring, or is it yes to all of the above? Are we entering completely unforeseen markets? Are there new market forces that are being posed upon us? And the answer is probably yes. It is probably yes this month, last month, next month, and the next quarter. The next step is then, how do we actually make decisions? Sesil brought this up, and I just want to spend a moment on it. One of the most difficult conversations that we try to facilitate with senior leaders is, how will you decide what is right, what is wrong, what is tonally, functionally, structurally, operationally, regulatorily matched to who you are, or more importantly, who you aspire to be, to this notion of the relentless pace of transformation and change. Getting them to actually codify that into a system that then in and of itself becomes a prioritization model is going to be absolutely necessary given the fluid nature of work and the fluid nature of organizations. These are organisms that are constantly changing. And when we get tired, which we always are, and when more work is imposed on us, which is always the case, it seems like, we need to have these guiding principles as our North Star, as a true sense of how are we going to govern all decision-making through the course of a broad-scale HR transformation. So if we know ourselves, we know how we make decisions, then we get into the mechanics of understanding what actually is intended to be transformed, in what order, and with what codependency on what internal and external resources. So an example, it's quite popular to deploy HR technology, brand new mobile-first HR technology. We're going to start with this device. It's at the center of every experience. Well, let's talk about that. If you're a highly distributed organization, let's say you're a retailer and you have 2,000 stores around the world, do you literally issue devices? Do you allow your individual employees to use those devices? If you do allow them to use their devices, is there bandwidth in the store? Or does all the Wi-Fi and all the bandwidth and wiring go to your point of sale systems or go to your displays, which are high energy, high interaction? If you do allow them to use the device, do they do it on the clock or off the clock? Do wage and hour compliance issues require you to geo-fence these wonderful apps that these wonderful HR technology vendors have harmonized for us? How do we link the 27 different apps that go from talent acquisition through talent management, through core HR, through payroll, through total rewards into one unified experience? What I mean by this is to intentionally overwhelm you, because until we unpack and have answers to every single one of these questions, we cannot begin to assess how a third party can serve as an accelerant or a distractor to our achievement of HR transformation. The mechanics is really a ground game. And part of this is actually intentionally involving a broad group of stakeholders, including explicitly those naysayers, those blockers who are vocal, who are largely known, and who are likely to distract you from your securing of the business case because they may have a personal or professional objective that's counter to what you're trying to achieve. Bring them in, activate them, gather their voice, get their perspectives, and capture that up front. The reason we're so good, frankly, at building these business cases is because we're going in eyes wide open. And now I'm going to get to some ridiculous mechanics that will get you over the finish line. Gather the last 5 business cases from your C-suite that were approved and the last 3 that weren't. I want to focus on font, format. I want to see how the financials are treated. I want to understand what is treated as capital versus operating expense. Your goal here is to eliminate any distraction, to focus your audience on the content in the context in which you're trying to transform, and to immediately draw their eye to what is important about organizational outcome versus the input into this business case. This is going to sound antithetical to what you would think I suggest. Eradicate HR speak. Inextricably linked this outcome to the 5 key pillars of what the organization has declared are critically important to the next 12 months, the next 18 months. Because what you're actually doing, and this is having presented to boards, and I'm sure we can all relate to this, when I sit in front of a board of directors and I can unquestionably link this initiative or these initiatives to these outcomes that we have declared from the rooftops are important to our 100,000 employees, what I'm basically gut checking to leadership is, are you going to stand behind what you've declared, right? Is this an aspirational idea? Or are you going to say that our employees are our most important asset? Well, if they are, then our investment of 10x to customer facing to 1x to employee facing is counter to that edict. So how are we going to bring this to life? And what you're trying to do is hold up a mirror of reflection where there's an undeniable recognition that we must take this on now. It is critically and inextricably linked to what we believe is a key care about. It is an acknowledgement to what Sesil and Jose described as our culture, our people, how we can achieve this. It's under a time frame that we believe is viable given other headwinds and tailwinds. It is with a team that is capable, either through internal and external resources, and it is funded through a combination of capital and operating expenditures that give us line of sight with a plus or minus percentage for controlling for error rate that we can predict, truly predict, without having to come back hat in hand 6 months from now to ask for an exception. All you have to do is that. Yeah, just do those things. That's it. So, and that's why this is such a difficult topic, because what each of those elements mean is going to be absolutely unique and bespoke to each of your organizations and where you find yourselves at this exact moment. Acknowledging that you changed the moment I said that and you're about to change in the next second. So we have to be fluid, we have to be dynamic, we have to be relatable, we have to be specific, and we have to eradicate distractions to make this easily consumable and executable by the organization.
Thank you so much. Oh, I hear an echo. I don't know if that's you. Okay, thank you, Mark. I know HR speak, right? There's so much to take in there, and I think you gave us some really thoughtful items to be, right? You gave us the list of items that we need to be in order to make this transformation. And I think that maybe at the top of that list, we should put, you need to be courageous. You need to be brave to be the one saying that, hey, these things need to change, you know, and status quo isn't okay anymore, right? Thank you so much for sharing that. And I hope that the audience took a lot away from that as well. Esther, I want to talk to you next. So, I've said a couple times now that people tend to think that transformation is an IT thing, and that we're focusing on some really tangible pieces to take away specifically for HR, talking about the culture, talking about the people. Mark gave us some really great things to think about to prepare ourselves that we have to plan for in order to get that case listened to and accepted. But there is always going to be a digital and a tech piece of transformation, right? What does that look like in today's space? At the heart is this digitization. So can we talk a little bit about the changing role of technology specifically in HR? Can you hear? I can't hear Esther right now. Yes, we can. Thank you.
Nope.
That's working temporarily. Not right now.
Something with the cable, I think, Esther. Yeah.
I had to log off and log back in.
The irony of Esther talking about technology isn't lost.
Not right now, no.
Can you hear the rest of us, Esther? Can you hear the rest of us, Esther? Thumbs down or thumbs up, thumbs up.
She could hear us, I think.
I don't think she can hear us either.
One moment, please.
I think there is a front here.
Well, as we're waiting for Esther.
It helped for me to exit and then come back in.
Okay.
I don't know if that's the difference.
You know, now might be a good time if there's questions. I've been monitoring the chat, and we did have, thank you again, Martin, for reaching out, and Sesil for sharing. If you haven't noticed that yet, the downloadable summary that Sesil shared based on what she was speaking with us about. But if we want to take a minute, if you have any questions from, oh, Esther's back. Looking good. Yes, we can hear you.
Yes.
Okay. Please do still,
we can
I
hear
was
you
going to say
now.
go to the chat, but please do that. But let's go ahead and turn over to Esther. So we were going to talk about the changing role of technology in HR specifically. Thank you.
So very quickly, I'll just comment on Jose's and Sesil's and Mark's points, because I think when we go to digitization, in particularly related to HR technology, we're zooming in a lot. And I want to take just a couple of minutes to zoom out a bit more, because I love what Jose started with, the whole business context, and Mark also, you also double click there a lot more on, you know, how will you measure that aspiration and that measure of success. And Sesil, you talked about the culture, the importance of who are we today. And I would want to invite the group to reflect that sometimes we miss out on the opportunity to zoom out a lot more and to really see what's happening in our industry, what's really happening to the kind of company we need to become transformationally. And, you know, I'm talking about, for example, auto companies thinking about themselves as mobility businesses, or, you know, pharma companies thinking about themselves as data businesses. So I think it is an opportunity for us as HR professionals to really, before jumping, you know, digitization, technology, culture, business case, I think we need to take a step back and say, what's happening to my industry? And are we really looking at transforming ourselves to be successful for the future? And what kind of you know, organization we will be? If we need to move from being a manufacturing auto company to be a mobility company, what would that even mean? What will it mean in terms of the kind of work we will be doing, the kind of people we will need to hire, the kind of capabilities we will have to have, the kind of you know, mindsets that we'll need to bring in, and hence that will only drive what kind of managerial structures we will have and what kind of leaders we will need. And then you will go into what kind of HR I will need. So I think sometimes when we talk about HR or HR transformation, we kind of stay within the arena of HR, which is obviously one of the biggest crimes. And I think the whole panel is just, you know, so experienced and have seen that. I think the second opportunity loss is when we stay only in the ambit of our business today and who we are today. I think if we stay in the business that we are today, we may have a fantastic, successful HR transformation, but we may not have a business 3 years or 4 years from today. So I think the danger is to be myopic and not realize that the success of the HR transformation is not going to be on the short term. It's going to be on how are we enabling our business to become the future possibility in that new industry that we need to become. So giving that context, let's imagine that we have clarity on that larger purpose of where we need to move. We have clarity of what kind of work we will need to do and what kind of capabilities we will need to bring. Jose and Sesil, both of you have talked about the resistance that the culture will bring, and I think we've covered that, and I think that's been taken care of. So a lot to be assumed. Then you get into how will technology enable that transformation? And I think, Mark, you mentioned beautifully about there are so many options, and I think we're so confused as buyers, because once there is a lot of startups that are coming up, there is a lot of consolidation happening, there are a lot of options in the market, and I think having clarity about what is the employee experience that I want to bring. And that's not, again, not only on HR systems, because the employee has one experience, which means I work here. So he doesn't really care whether that's an HR system or a sales system or, I don't know, whatever. I want my work to happen hassle-free, and I want to really focus on delivering my best because I want to be successful, and I don't want anything to be an inconvenience to my success. And really, that's how an employee will look at his life at work. So how can we as HR professionals design experiences, use technology to finalize what is going to be high touch, what is going to be high tech, have a lot of clarity on what kind of tech stack is going to give me the business outcomes and the business visibility, but at the same time, that seamless experience for the employee, and realizing that that's not going to be a one-time exercise. In many ways, whatever made you successful to a point, and it could be also technology implementation, will cease to be successful very soon. So that energy and that dynamism to be able to disrupt your own self when it comes to HR technology, and not really think about, oh, we did this only 12 months ago, why do we need to change it? Well, if we have to change it, we have to change it. At the end of the day, the user is at the center and the business is finally the one who needs to deliver, we need to deliver to. So a lot of opportunities from technology. What I see is the clarity of first understanding technology deeply. Secondly, that technology needs to get connected to everything else that we do. It can't be, as Marky was saying, just one app because it's cool. I saw it in some big event, and I really want to get it because it makes me look good. But if people are not going to have access to it, if it doesn't connect to other systems, then that's not transformation, really.
Mm-hmm. And I think you touched on it, Esther. You really have to understand what is the end that you're working towards. I think it's so nice to buy the shiny app off the shelf, but as you were saying, is it going to accomplish your business outcomes? Is it really going to give your organization what it needs, what it's looking for? Does it fit in with the processes? Are the processes even the right processes anymore? Is that something that you need to take a look at and update as part of this transformation? So technology is always going to be a big piece. You should educate yourself. I think I'm hearing that over and over again with this conversation as well. Your business, know your industry, right? And I'm sure with all of the extra time that our participants have, it's going to be really easy to just take the time to learn all that, right? No, you guys are busy, aren't you? You're in the field, you're in the trenches, maybe you're individual contributors, maybe you're managing a team of people. There's so much to do in your everyday. I just want to turn it back to the panel then. So thinking about that, right? Thinking about the folks who I imagine, the 57 of you who are with us right now, who dialed in, this is important to you, so in your busy days, in this busy time that these individuals have every day, what are these kind of final thoughts that they should be thinking about as they're looking to make their cases? What are some things that they can walk away with and take action on after this call?
May, can I answer a question that Martin posted over here, because I think it's
Great.
One of the most critical items that pops up in here, which has to do with data and analytics. And I will say that I firmly believe that whether it comes through your third party providers, whether it's your benefit brokers, whoever it may be, they're going to provide you the data for impetus for change. Don't walk in with anecdotal data. Every time somebody walked into my office, whether it was at Anthem, which is a Fortune 30 company, or Walmart, which was a Fortune 10 company, or Burger King, the first question I always asked was, where's the data to support that? And if their answer was, I think, then I think we had a problem, because you couldn't really drive an HR transformative strategy with just that gut instinct. Now, interestingly enough, when we would go out and speak with our partners, whether it was operators that have been there for 30, 40 years, it was okay for them to leverage their gut to say, well, I'm not really sure. We tried that in 1996 and it just didn't work. But the data that we're pulling out of systems today, the human capital management systems today, as inexpensive as some of them are, as expensive as they are, whatever you have from Workday to Ultimate to Paylocity to Paycor, it doesn't matter. Most of those systems are providing you information. Your brokers are providing you information. If I could have predicted, which I saw it 25 years ago, looking at my benefits, that we were going to have an opioid epidemic in the US, it was clear as day. We saw it. We saw opioids and we saw antidepressants being the #1 and #2 prescription medication in the United States. And what we were doing is not necessarily addressing an HR transformation process that was going to address a problem 10, 15 years from now. Data is critical. Data is important for you to present to the C, for you to present to your holders. And I would strongly advise against going in there with anecdotal data, with just your gut instinct, with I think we need to do this. You'll go far with some folks that have a belief system that you know what you're talking about from your gut. But if you're coming from the outside, for example, and you were hired to come in and lead a transformation, it's all data driven because you don't have the credibility.
Hey, Jose, can I build on what you're saying? I'm going to use my my training from improv, yes and so I think it is a yes and. So what we've seen is the underlying intrinsic data to substantiate the case for change is foundational. The anecdotal data is the story that brings the data to life, the anecdotal story. So I'll give you an example. We had a large, complex, global distributed client. They were in hoteling, they were in manufacturing, they have a very large enterprise. I met a young man on my first day there, worked at the front desk, had worked at the hotel for 4 weeks. And I asked him, I meet people, this is part of what I do. I said, how do you like it? Are they a good employer, et cetera? I'm interviewing him. He said, well, I'm working on my welder's license. I said, okay, that's great. Well, how long is it going to be until your welder's license? So this is skill, right? And he said, well, I should be done in 8 weeks. And I said, okay, so you've been here 4 weeks. How long was your training? Training was 3.5 weeks. You're going to have your welder's license in 8 weeks. What do you plan to do when you get your welder's license? And he said, well, I'm going to quit. And I said, did you know that you have a sister business that does manufacturing and defense work? And they have 14 job openings right now for welders. And I told that story to the board of directors. Why? Because at the end of the day, the impetus, the data was about global mobility and the fact that they had no common skills taxonomy to understand the intrinsic or developing skills of their people to look at opportunities to relocate those assets to various business units around the world. So when we're presenting these cases, the combination of the data itself is foundational to change, combined with the anecdotal data, because we are a storytelling people as humans. Yeah. And we have to be able to convey this into real live individuals that we can communicate with. Esther talks about environment. You know, all you have to talk about is, remember when the restrooms were closed last week because we had a flood in building 2? Everyone's gonna be like, yeah, well, how is that for the employee experience? Everyone can relate to the fact that that's part of a horrible employee experience in that building. So what are we doing for infrastructure? We're talking about mobile apps. We can't get the bathroom to work. So I think everyone can relate to that. Cecile, it looks like you want to build on what I'm saying.
Yeah. I did. I love what Jose had brought up, and I love your commentary too. I was going to agree more or less, actually. In my experience, the presence of data is not always sufficient to prove that the outcomes will be different, right? So there has to be a container for it, which what you said, Mark. If there's no strategy in place for managing the data, once the data is collected, there's really no point in it because you don't know what you're looking for. At the same time, data is not same as logic. So I speak to a lot of C-suite people who've said, you know, they've had the kind of consulting and sometimes with the bigger firms, and they say, I had all the data, but it didn't show us or point us to the right direction. Well, it's because data is just data, right? Like, it's supposed to show you some trends, and if you know what you're looking in it, it's going to point you to some really good scenarios and possibilities, but you still need to have a reason for why you're going after that. So alone, it doesn't give you everything you're looking for. So I always say you have to somehow meld it with your intuition, experience, purpose all together. So it's not just a standalone.
Mm-hmm. So I'll just add one more point, and I think the three of you have covered everything. Just to add one more final, probably reflection on when we're doing data and analysis, and I think it is an iterative process. I think it's that zest for curiosity to really know more about why things may be happening. And I love, Jose, your point about, really being very disciplined to try to validate those, and Mark, your point as well on, are some of those stories really telling me something? And Sesil, your point as well, bringing it all together. I feel that sometimes we get too obsessed to come to a conclusion, and we either start, massaging the data, so hence it starts aligning to what we want to believe it's happening, or what we think whoever is going to be the decision maker wants to believe that it's happening. So I think we need to just be very truthful, finally, that, and that really comes, I think children are the best teachers of that curiosity, when you really genuinely want to know. And, you come to some hypothesis, but if data changes or evidence change or the context change, you may have to actually revisit that decision. And I think that's just that continuous exercise that we were talking about. And data is a great exercise as well to help us keep being agile. So it's not just that you do your analysis, you're done, you take the decision, you close that, that box. Unfortunately, I think that box continues to be open and we keep learning from it.
I think you raised a great.
I love.
No, Sesil, please.
Sorry.
I'm just gonna
type. Go ahead.
We're all so excited. I think you raised a great point there, Esther, about the curiosity, and I think that's something that we should all definitely think about as part of this transformation journey. Keep asking questions. Don't assume that you know what people want or what that goes for your stakeholders first and foremost. So when you're making this business case, you really need to figure out what their care abouts are, right? And I think Mark alluded to that. Look at, the last business cases that got approved and the ones that didn't. Why? What was even down to the details of the fund? I love that. Those are, I think, really important things to think about, and always be curious, keep that open mind, and ask those questions. Thank you for the chat. We got some really active participants here, and we really love seeing that. Thank you for sharing your thoughts and asking your questions. We talked about the data, and I'm so glad that we shared that piece. We have a little bit more time to share with the group here then kind of those final key things that the folks here that attended today should really think about when making their case. What are those tangible pieces? What should they really bring to their organizations to make this case? So why don't we start with Jose? We'll start where we started.
So I'll tell you, we've covered quite a bit of information, and the one thing that I have learned over the course of having been the head of human resources in fast food, in auto manufacturing, in healthcare, and other areas, is that I'm gonna try to leverage it by saying no size fits all, right? In this case, every organization is slightly different. Every leadership team is slightly different. How you sell that HR transformation sometimes takes some time to observe what you're seeing. Every time I've gone into an organization, I've been welcomed with open arms for HR transformation. And the minute you start talking about transforming HR, some people were like, whoa. We're not sure we're ready for that yet. And Mark said it earlier, it's rare to find an organization that doesn't have the need for HR transformation. We talked about HR technology. When you look at where many of us are spending our investment dollars, because if we are looking at the future of HR, there's artificial intelligence in almost every aspect of HR now: sourcing, screening, selection. Now we're looking at compensation and benefits. We're looking at back office work. I recently invested in an organization that has chatbots that can communicate with human capital management systems, so that you are now even reducing the number of individuals that are having conversations with employees about how many days of vacation do I have, what form do I need to fill out for FMLA, et cetera. The function is transforming. If you choose not to lead that transformation, the transformation is going to happen for you. The speed of it is going to depend on the industry you're in. Yes, some companies are dinosaurs. I mean, some of us work for organizations that are dinosaurs, and some of us work for organizations that are moving at the speed of light. And certainly we've seen industry after industry being disrupted. Somebody said it earlier about mobility, certainly retail. if you're not in the forefront as an HR, as a human capital leader, and instead you're just waiting for somebody to come in and tell you, Jose, we have to reduce another 20,000 people, without having had the information, the data available that maybe could have provided a different solution, whether it's through technology, whether it's through other innovative strategies, which many of your peers in the human resources side are already doing. That's what these forums are for, so that you can network and you can find out what your peers across the street are doing, what your peers across the country are doing, what your peers across the world are doing in terms of human resources practices. So no one size fits all, and the way that you present it in one company may be vastly different than how you present it in another company. How it's perceived in one industry will be significantly perceived in another. And transformation, I've said it, I've seen, I was down here in South Florida when transformation happened. I'm showing my age. When transformation was the hype, the big word at the video store. You all remember the big video store based in Florida and then moved to Texas, and then it was replaced by by Netflix and other players. But they were going through a transformation. I just don't know what happened to it, and whether or not transformation actually works is very dependent on the type of work that HR is leading. If we take a back seat and we just wait to be told, hey, we gotta close another 15 video stores. Okay, we're gonna close another 15 video stores instead of going out there and looking for the challenge that maybe streaming is coming and maybe nobody's gonna be renting VHS tapes or DVDs. So that's my last word, is no size fits all. Really examine the culture and really examine the industry before you jump forward, because in some instances you might find, and I'm sure there's people on this call that were invited to the party to go run an innovation strategy, and then you sit there and a few months later you're going, no, you don't really need me. I think you need somebody else who's just going to keep the lights on, and I'm going to go someplace else.
Hey, Meg, can I add just two quick things that are going to be counterintuitive? So you've heard this all, just because why not mix it up at the end of a call? It's late, right? So I think you've heard two themes here that I just want to pinpoint on and make sure that I highlight. One is what Esther pulled out earlier, which is you have to go big to go small. And what I mean by that is if you're in the railroading industry and the goal is autonomous railing, you have to understand the vision of an industry. You're in long haul trucking or logistics, and it's all about robotic processes and autonomy and autonomous mechanical vehicles of any type and shape or form. If you don't know that input, you can't figure out step one to get really small and specific and bespoke and narrow on the order in which you will effectuate change to drive that particular outcome. The other is to go slow to go fast. Right? So part of what we've talked about, and all of the panelists have talked about, which I love, is spending a disproportionate amount of time preparing for change versus changing. And again, I think as humans, we want to jump right in. We want to see the outcome. We want quick wins. I was in Germany 2 weeks ago, and the CHRO and the CTO said, well, we need some quick wins. I said, do you consider January of 2022 quick? Like, I don't have your sense of space and time. Maybe that's quick for you, but that's when we're going to see like the first deliverable from this project. And as we unpack the why, they understood. So I just think we have to understand that it does take time to step back, to assess, to prioritize, to understand, to prepare, to organize, to solidify, to codify, to approve before we start that first step, like that first moment to transformation. So just a couple closing pieces.
Those are great. I'll go next, Meighan, if that's okay. So there are three from my side. I think the first is, which we have touched upon throughout the panel, is why do you think you need a transformation in the first place? A lot of the organizations will answer that with saying, because we want to have sustainable growth. Well, that's great. If that's what you're after and you understand your industry, then you need to know, research will tell you that you need to think about your capabilities, your business capabilities, but also your human capacity. So there are two sides of the coin that you need to think about. And you need to recognize it's going to take significant amount of resources, emotional and otherwise, to go through the process. But if you're serious, which is probably my second point, then you need to be very clear on the outcome you're looking to drive, which was Esther's point. And I fully agree. What is the experience? What's the renewed experience you're actually looking to fulfill or provide to your audience? And the last point I'll say is, because we work with so many organizations, small and large, a lot of the times HR is feeling really squeezed, like, I don't know where to move. And my challenge always is to my peers, how are you challenging the status quo? What are you personally doing, but also as a function? How are you rethinking taxonomy? How are you rethinking your language? How are you rethinking your practices? Because if you don't walk the talk, nobody is going to buy in on what you're trying to achieve. So those are probably three things that I would want the audience to have. Yeah.
So, Meg, I'm just going to close with one story, and I think it links to Sesil's point about, what are you doing yourself to really take charge of the transformation. And I was watching a video of Satya Nadella very recently, and it was an old video, so I really can't contextualize when he said that, but I think it was very meaningful. He reflected, and he was talking about Microsoft as a company, but I think the story can be translated to each one of us as professionals. So that's why I think it links to Sesil's point, her last point. So he mentioned and reflected that, any of you who are here in this webinar, the 68 of you plus, the 5 of us, we are here to some extent. We've been successful to whatever we have done here and there. We've contributed, we've made a difference to the organizations we work with, the peers we've been with. And his reflection was that at some point, whatever made you good and made you successful is going to start running out of gas. And you're going to start seeing diminishing returns out of that value or that skill or that behavior or whatever it is. And then, when that happens, you'll have to realize that you have to actually bring change. And what he was reflecting, of course, was in the context of an organization, you'll have the culture will become the rejection antibody for that change, because obviously we have been successful doing what we've been doing. So why will we want to change? So rejection, I think from individual perspective, is that fear of, learning a new skill, or as you, Sesil, you were saying, what are you doing to change that? Well, I'm also scared that, maybe I won't be so successful then, or maybe, what will happen to me? Or will I, fail? And maybe I'm a very senior person. How will I manage failure, right? So I think his whole story was saying that you must be aware that you'll run out of gas, not once, not twice, but in the context of volatility and uncertainty, we will all run out of gas very often. And we just need to get very used to the fact that there will be, we will have to reinvent ourselves. And when it comes to HR transformation, there's no difference. So your HR processes will run out of gas. Your HR experience will also run out of gas. And we'll have to just get used to the fact that we have to face when we are running out of gas and take that courage to really make that change.
That's great.
I love that, Esther. And what a wonderful way, I think, to end this conversation. An hour's too short. Thank you all so much. Thanks to those of you who were with us during the conversation, active in the chat. We really hope you got some important pieces of information. I think there's some really actionable, tangible items that you can take away from this conversation. Sesil, Mark, Jose, Esther, it was a real joy and pleasure to be speaking with you today. And I hope everyone has a great rest of your morning, afternoon, evening from wherever you are. Thank you for joining us from all around the world. And please continue to join this awesome conference that Enrique has put together. And we'll see you again soon. Take care, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.